Hey guys, so I recently provided a meta tier list by the data for the best decks in the current format post Legacy of Destruction. This time let's just focus only on the rogue decks using data from YCS regional level topping information as well as some dueling book data from the current format. As always, check out my discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Supplies as well as singles. I really want to highlight that Card Brawlers, they do have their pre-orders up for singles for that rarity collection too. And you can use code Hakuna5 for 5% off. They do ship internationally, so definitely go check that out. I'll have it all in the description below. Anyway, speaking of that meta tier list that I provided last week, this is basically what it ended up looking like. So for the purpose of this video, we're going to just focus on decks that are not in tier 1 and 2 in this image, although I'm also going to just scoot Kashira into tier 2 for the sake of this video. Alright, so let's just start with the rogue tier list for this month, and we technically have Dark World at the top, and that's because it did top the YCS, and it's actually the only rogue deck in this entire video that topped the YCS, and because of the scoring, it does weight. YCS tops a lot more than, regional level tops, and when it comes to kind of like more so meta decks, the top decks, that ends up working out pretty nicely. When it comes to rogue, the score gets pretty volatile, and so, while it is number 1 here, I am going to blank it out as we move forward with the rest of this video, just because I know a lot of people like to kind of skip to the end and just see all the decks outlined, and they're just going to see Dark World at number 1 and not really understand what's going on there. But at the same time, a play of Droll has gone down quite a lot. I recently highlighted that in my YCS Top Cut breakdown for Rio that you can also check out as well to help you prepare for your side deck list. But anyways, we are just going to blank it out. Of course, no disrespect to the player that topped with Dark World. It's amazing. I think it is definitely a really strong deck if it does get to go first. But at the same time, at least from a representation, I don't think it's technically the best rogue deck right now. Then we have Yubel, which arguably is more so like fringe tier 2 deck at this point. I think it's actually kind of picking it up now in terms of regional level tops, and of course it's only going to get better because they are still missing at least that fusion one. Hopefully maybe it comes out before NAWCQ. We do have Battles of Legend, we also have Infinite Forbidden, so basically we do have 2 opportunities for whenever that card gets imported. Definitely one of the funnier decks I've played against. I mean, I think it's weird that it basically forces you into attacking them and you also take double damage. Really interesting, and definitely, I don't know if they sell like Super Poly the whole board, but definitely been a victim of that before. Then we have Centurion, which is another, I think, fringe tier 2 deck. I think this deck has gotten a lot stronger because of Shifter, because it can actually play Shifter now. It's new synchro, it does allow them to put the, into the spell trap zone from the banish pile as well. So that also means, with Bis Shields, that actually doesn't really affect them anymore if you try to do that in the end phase as well. And the great thing about Shifter too is that it also shuts down Forbidden Droplet, which is one of the weaknesses for this deck in terms of when it tries to go into like the Calamity lock. So that's kind of a nice. Super Poly doesn't see that much play, especially among non-branded decks, and even branded decks don't even really play it that much anymore. But Book of Eclipse at the same time is kind of seeing a bit more popularity, I believe, and Cosmic Cyclone is definitely very popular as seen in that YCS Rio Top Cut breakdown. And then we also have Pure Unchained. Of course, Unchained is seeing a lot of play in terms of like with Yubel cards as well. So this, I know I recently provided a profile. I don't know if that's standard. He was playing more so like the Mayakashi like turn skip with like Beatrice and everything. But you know what? It's actually getting a decent amount of tops. I think post Infinite Forbidden, I believe the Fiendsmith cards are coming out of that, and I'm sure that can only make this deck better. So moving on, we do have Tearlaments, and so this actually very recently won an entire regional, which is actually from Top Tier Gaming. Definitely go check out his channel. Super knowledgeable. I really like his videos. So congrats to him. Obviously, he was playing with like the Paleozoic stuff, so I think that's cool. There's different ways to go about it. Lightsworn, which we're going to talk about that a little bit at the end, but Lightsworn Tearlaments I think is also one of the things that people have been experimenting with. I think Tearlaments can definitely have a high ceiling. I know in the last meta tier list video, I think someone made a comment that it's not really that consistent anymore. Obviously lost Agido Kelbeck, but when it goes off, it definitely can be very scary. So next we have Sprite, which of course is the partner in crime for Tearlaments in terms of Power of the Elements set. So this, I guess, is kind of under the radar almost. I feel like I haven't seen that many topping Sprite deck lists, but at the same time, clearly it has actually topped some regionals. I know Runic for Hire Sprite was one of them. There were actually a couple Pearly Sprite as well. I'm not entirely sure how that was categorized by Ivan, which I should definitely shout out as always in terms of him keeping track of all these regional and YCS level tops. Sprite, super consistent at the very least. I think, going first, I've also faced this recently. It can actually be pretty decent still. So, and of course, Dark Rule Nomura is actually, I think, one of the side options again now, especially with something like, let's say, like Melodias, where they can easily just pop off and off one card and things like that. So Droplet, Dark Ruler, that is kind of popular, which of course has been always kind of strong against Sprite. So next we have Chimera, and I'm not going to put branded Chimera anymore because, of course, if you watch my recent Toronto regional deck profile, Ferruccio, who finished first place with Chimera Melodious, super cool. I think a new way to play this deck, and perhaps maybe it's the best way. I'm not sure, but I think it's really promising and really cool that he was able to pull that off. You know, very competitive Toronto regionals, by the way, a lot of top name players, and he managed to come first place. So definitely go check that out, check the list out. So next we have Salamangreat. So this is definitely kind of tapered off, like leading into the current format. This actually did have back-to-back YCS tops, and I remember putting it actually at like the edge of tier 2 just in terms of number of tops. And regional wise, so far has actually gotten a few, but definitely not as good as before. Obviously, I don't think anything has really changed. I mean, I guess with the ban list, I mean, I know some of the topping regional Salamangreat lists that I've worked, you know, they were playing Summon Limit in this high, which of course is now banned. I can't really see that being like a huge difference maker, at least I like to think that way. I think Salamangreat still has some promise, and of course I'm sure we'll see a bit more top in the future. So then we have Rescue Ace, which is always super weird calling this a rogue deck. I still feel like just in terms of power level, it's so strong because it has a combination of, you know, monster level interruptions as well as lots of back row that they can easily set. But you know what, among the fire decks, obviously people are just playing towards, you know, a Snake Eye or Snake Eye Fire King, and I guess this is kind of being left in the back burner. But nonetheless, it has a few regional tops at the very least, but really not seeing that much play. So next we have Orcus. I believe there were two at least that topped. One was Skystrike Orcus, which is a really big throwback to like 2019, 2020, early 2020. And then you also had Runic Orcus, which has been more the popular version nowadays, especially post-ban list, when we actually saw a decent amount of Orcus top right after Harpur came back. So I guess nowadays, I mean, Cosmic Cyclone, as I mentioned, is pretty popular. I can only imagine, you know, any kind of Runic deck, obviously that hurts. And of course with Babel, if you want to, if you have it on the field, it's very strong, and Cosmic is one of the ways to at least get rid of it, to prevent them from being able to use all the Orcus effects as quick effects. So I think it's still pretty cool, but definitely has fallen off quite a lot. So next, that's a good segue. We actually have Pure Sky Striker, and this deck actually did top the Montreal Regionals, which you can also check out on my channel. It did get engaged to 3 on the recent ban list, so that's kind of nice for them, of course. And then they're about to get new support as well in June in Battles of Legends. So I'm sure we're going to see some at NAWCQ. Maybe one ends up topping. I'm sure the Yu-Gi-Oh! World will explode if it does. Definitely very control-oriented, still going second deck as well. It used to be more of a going first deck back when it was like tier 1, and eventually kind of slowly transitioned to more going second deck, especially after like Mystic Mind came out as well. So you know what, at the very least, for a deck that has, I believe, the most YCS tops in like history, I'm sure there's still some potential for it to get better with this new support. And then we have Vanadium. This deck really fell off hard. Of course, you know, it's funny because with that January ban list where it didn't have any direct Vanadium hits, I know there were some, including myself, we were a little bit concerned, you know, in terms of how strong this deck could be, because at the time there was definitely conversation for this deck to be like a tier 1 contender. But then, you know, very quickly when the format started, a lot of people were starting out the format with like Droll, and again, this is like that January ban list format, and Vanadium definitely started seeing a decline in play. And now on top of that, you also have something like Barone ban, which is kind of key, I guess, in terms of, I guess, maybe playing around Nibiru. Certainly let me know if you do still play this deck. So unfortunately, it's taken a lot of step back and not seeing that much success. And then you also have Hero, of course, you know, as rogue as it gets, really good old reliable in this kind of section. It did have a regional top again. It actually has consistently gotten just like one top at least every format now for the last little while, at least in the past, you know, at least half a year. So I'm not really sure if Dark Angel is much of a threat anymore, at least in terms of the current meta. But at the same time, I mean, they at least still have something like DPE. You also have something like Plasma, which one-sided skill drain is kind of nice because, well, you know what, skill drain in itself has actually been a pretty decent side deck option, even for decks that normally struggle under it. But as long as you can, you know, kind of set up your own thing and you just skill drain them, kind of like the same logic as Summon Limit, you're probably going to win. And they also, of course, have something like Dark Law as a Macrocosmos, which is very strong against something like Snake Eye. So next we have Vanquish Soul, which really fell off, and so I'm actually going to get a deck profile for this one that did, the one list that did top, so definitely stay tuned for that. You know, it is a shifter deck, which I guess that's kind of like the main thing it's got going for it, but at the same time you have decks something like Tempai Dragons, you know, as I mentioned, Centurion, and you obviously have something like Flunder and Cashier that are sort of classified as tier 2 and we're not part of this video, but you know, those decks also play shifter, and if everyone's playing, or if a lot of decks are playing shifter, then it's obviously not going to be that great. So it definitely has fallen off. Who knows, maybe it comes back, and who knows, maybe they actually get further support down the line. You never know. You also have Rika. This is a deck that had some tops actually in the last format as well. You know, of course with the ban list, nothing really changed for them this time around. But I guess, you know, only one regional top so far, at least that's publicly known. They did get some new Aromish support. I mean, as I faced against this deck, I mean, I think the turn 1 board can actually still be pretty scary, but at the same time, I guess not seeing that much success. And then you also have Paleozoic. This is more so the pure version, I suppose. And so Yuri Landsman, who also featured on my channel twice, actually, he had a regional top with this format and also a regional top just at the tail end of last format as well with a 60 card trap Paleozoic list. So definitely go check it out. He had a lot of really funny, janky traps that I don't think I've seen in quite some time. And of course, you know, Paleozoic in itself, I don't think I've even really seen play ever in competitive play, or rather tournaments, since maybe like 2019. And even at that point, it was considered a pretty rogue option. So really cool to see this kind of like old deck come back again, and definitely go check out that profile. You also have Sword Soul. So you know what, they did get Protoss back on that ban list, which I'm not sure why they did, although at the same time I guess we're not really seeing many meta decks actually utilize it. At the same time, Sword Soul, they did lose Barone, which means they do play into Nibiru harder now, and I don't think you can get to the Protoss line in under 5 summons. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. So I think we can, I guess, take that exchange. So definitely Sword Soul, while being a budget deck, I think has taken quite a step back, but it did top the, I believe, Netherlands Nationals. I did try to reach out to him, try to get a profile. I didn't hear back yet, but hopefully we can get that on the channel for you. But yeah, I think this is definitely a pretty popular choice, at least for those starting out. But I think it's kind of harder to recommend this deck nowadays because it's just not as good. And then we have Altergeist, which is another blast from the past. So, you know, it's funny, my very first video on my YouTube channel was actually a Cyber Dragon vs Altergeist Dueling Book replay video, because at that point, back in like mid-2020, Altergeist was actually a respectable rogue option. Not so much anymore. They did get some new support last summer, I believe, which was actually not that bad. It is a trap base deck, but at the same time they do summon quite a lot, and it's not your conventional floodgate kind of trap deck, I guess. So you know what, it did top a regional though, which is nice to see. It hasn't done that in quite some time, but I guess if you're playing a trap deck, you're probably on something like Labyrinth. And then we have Lightsworn Runic in particular, and that's because on YCS Scope, at least for Dueling Book data, just Lightsworn, there were, I think, too many different variants, and it was just sort of adding all together, and it was kind of hard to sparse it out, but at least this one was separated. And Lightsworn Runic, I think, is the more popular version. I know Jesse Khan had done a video on this showing the Tier Limit version and the Runic version, and the Runic version did seem to be a little bit more explosive. And I actually did a recently deck profile with my friend Daniel from Toronto Regionals as well that you can check out in terms of this deck list. Obviously, it's still very, very rogue. It does not have any regional level tops so far. I mean, there is some promise. I think it's actually still pretty decent. I'm sure it can hopefully get a regional top somewhere in there in the near future. I think Lightsworn really cool, nostalgic, you know, being able to mill, and especially with the runic stuff, you get to mill your runic spells, which means a lot of times you're probably going to be able to actually draw 3 off your runic spells, so that's really, really strong. And finally, we have another blast from the past, which is Blackwing. So kind of in that like 2010 time frame, again, similar to like Lightsworns. So it did top this regional. It plays a lot of Bishows. I'm not even sure what their end board is anymore, because I know when Darkwing Blast first came out, and this was like Tier Limit format, they had the 2 new synchros that they would summon both of them out and essentially burn like 1400 for every effect that you use, which was actually kind of decent against Tier Limits, I guess. And then I believe at YCS Vancouver last September, there was a player that almost topped, or maybe he did top, I can't remember, but he was playing Blackwings, and it was more of like an FTK version. I was looking at the deck list that did top this regional. I don't think it was an FTK. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm perhaps missing something. So if you do play this deck, definitely let me know what you try to do with Blackwing. Obviously, very, very nostalgic, and I think it's really cool that it was able to top even now. Anyways, guys, that was it for the Rogue tier list by the data for this month. Hopefully that was interesting, and hopefully it helps you in choosing which next Rogue deck to pursue in this current format, if that's what you like to play. Definitely a huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my patrons and sponsors as well for the continued support. Again, check out that Rarity Collection pre-orders up for singles. Add Card Brawlers. You can use code KUNA5 for 5% off. And well, take care, guys.